Please, close your eyes for just a moment. Try to remember the heavy, metallic clanking of the milkman delivering thick glass bottles in the early frosty morning. Or perhaps recall the warm, comforting scent of fresh tea brewing on a gas stove in a tiny, cozy kitchen while your grandmother hummed a familiar tune. Today, my dear friends, we are going to travel back in time to 1960s Russia. We will remember 30 forgotten everyday objects and rituals that defined our youth, our families, and our homes. And make sure to stay with me until the very end, because the last memory we will share is guaranteed to bring a warm, deeply nostalgic tear to your eyes. Back in those days, time seemed to flow entirely differently. It was slower, more measured, and completely unhurried. We did not have instant messaging or endless television channels, but our lives were incredibly rich and deeply connected. Some young people today might think that without modern technology, our lives were empty or emotionally poor. But they could not be more wrong. We knew the true value of anticipation. Waiting for a handwritten letter from a dear friend or waiting for our favorite movie to be shown on the only television channel made those moments incredibly precious. We spent our evenings talking face to face, sitting in cramped kitchens, sharing stories, and laughing together until our stomachs hurt. The objects we used every single day were not just mindless tools, they were companions in our journey. They were heavy, sturdy, and reliable. They carried the warmth of human hands and the weight of genuine, unconditional care. And now, let us remember the legendary avoska, the woven cotton string bag that was an absolute necessity for every single citizen in 1960s Russia. Do you remember the feeling of carrying one in your pocket? It was so incredibly compact that it could easily fit into a coat pocket or a tiny purse, just waiting for its moment. The name itself, avoska, comes from the Russian word for perhaps or just in case. You never quite knew when you might stumble upon a store selling something rare or essential, so you always carried it with you. When you managed to buy groceries, the thin cotton strings would stretch and expand to hold an astonishing amount of weight. Can you still feel the way the heavy strings would dig into your palms when you carried a dozen glass milk bottles, a heavy loaf of dark rye bread, and maybe a few apples? We did not have shiny plastic bags back then, but the avoska was infinitely more reliable and eco-friendly before that term even existed. It was not just a bag, it was a symbol of hope and preparedness. Neighbors would see you walking down the street with a full avoska, and they could instantly see what treasures you had managed to find. It started conversations, it prompted questions about which store had what in stock, and it quietly connected everyone in a shared pursuit of daily provisions. Today, the avoska is almost completely forgotten, replaced by wasteful plastic, but in our memories, it remains a true icon of our resilient youth. Let us turn our memories to the heavy cast-iron waffle maker, affectionately known as the waffelnica, that lived in almost every kitchen cabinet. If you grew up in 1960s Russia, you definitely remember the immense weight of this simple device when you pulled it down from the top shelf. Making waffles was never just a quick snack, it was an elaborate weekend ritual that involved the whole family. Can you still smell the intoxicating sweet aroma of melting butter and sugar that would instantly fill the entire apartment? We would heat the heavy iron directly over the open blue flame of the gas stove. You had to have a special intuition to know exactly when to flip the heavy metal plates. The most magical part, however, was rolling the waffles into tubes while they were still incredibly hot, often burning the tips of our fingers in the process. We would then fill those crispy golden tubes with boiled condensed milk, creating the most decadent dessert imaginable. There were no expensive bakeries or fancy cafes on every corner, so we created our own magic at home. The waffelnica required patience, care, and a tolerance for hot metal, but it rewarded us with treats that modern store-bought sweets can never rival. Every time that iron sizzled with fresh batter, it meant it was a holiday, a birthday, or just a beautiful Sunday spent surrounded by the people we loved most in the world. Let us take a moment to recall the comforting clinking sound of thick glass milk bottles, an everyday melody of our childhood. In those days, milk did not come in sterile cardboard boxes or flimsy plastic jugs. It came in heavy, wide-necked glass bottles sealed with colorful aluminum foil caps. Do you remember the exact color coding? Silver was for regular milk, green was for kefir, and the beautiful striped foil was for ryazhenka. Opening one of these bottles was a sensory experience all on its own. You would press your thumb right into the center of the soft foil cap, feeling it give way with a satisfying little pop. Sometimes the cream would rise to the very top, sitting in a thick, delicious layer right beneath the foil, waiting to be scooped out with a teaspoon. When the bottle was empty, we never threw it away. We would meticulously wash it out and collect them in a metal wire crate in the corner of the kitchen. Returning the empty glass bottles to the grocery store was a task often entrusted to us children, and the small change we received in return felt like a true fortune. We would immediately spend those few kopecks on a fruit popsicle or a glass of sparkling water from the street machine. The glass milk bottle was a perfect cycle of life, a daily routine that taught us responsibility and gave us the simplest, most innocent joys of our early years. And now let us remember the mysterious and slightly strange inhabitant of nearly every Soviet windowsill, the enormous 3-liter glass jar housing the tea mushroom. Today the entire world drinks expensive kombucha for their health, but we had our own magical brewing station right at home in 1960s Russia. Do you remember looking at that thick, layered, slightly gelatinous disc floating at the top of the dark amber liquid? To a child it looked almost like a living creature, an alien being that had taken up residence in the kitchen. Caring for the tea mushroom was a weekly ritual treated with immense respect. Our mothers and grandmothers would carefully brew strong black tea, sweeten it with exactly the right amount of sugar, wait for it to cool perfectly, and then gently pour it over the mushroom. We covered the top of the jar with a piece of white medical gauze secured by a simple rubber band to let it breathe. And the taste. Oh, do you remember that sharp, fizzy, sweet and sour taste when you poured a cold glass on a sweltering summer afternoon? It was more refreshing than any store-bought soda. The mushroom was shared among neighbors and friends. You would carefully peel off a thin layer and place it in a smaller jar to give to a colleague. It was a living, breathing testament to community and shared resources, thriving on the sunlit windowsills of our youth. Let us close our eyes and listen for the loud, rhythmic ticking of the heavy mechanical alarm clock, perhaps a Slava or a Yantar, sitting proudly on the nightstand. In a world before silent digital screens and smartphones, time had a physical presence in our bedrooms. The ticking was so loud that a modern person might find it impossible to sleep, but to us it was the comforting heartbeat of our home. Do you remember the cold, metallic feel of the winding keys on the back? Every single night, winding the clock was a mandatory ritual. You would turn the little key until you felt the tight resistance of the inner spring, a physical connection between your own energy and the passing of time. And then there was the alarm itself. It did not play a gentle, soothing melody. When the designated hour arrived, it unleashed an earth-shattering, metallic ringing that could wake the entire neighborhood. You would blindly reach out from beneath your warm, heavy cotton blanket, fumbling in the dark winter morning to press down the stiff metal button and silence the beast. These clocks were practically indestructible, often surviving falls from tables and continuing to tick away for decades. They witnessed our early mornings before school, our hurried rushes to the factory, and our quiet weekend lie-ins. They were loyal, tireless companions that marked the precious hours of our most vibrant years. Let us breathe in the memory of the most iconic fragrance of our time, the legendary Krasnaya Moskva, or Red Moscow perfume. If you grew up in 1960s Russia, this scent is forever etched into your very soul. It was the absolute pinnacle of elegance and beauty for our mothers and grandmothers. Do you remember the small, elegant glass bottle with the red cap shaped like an onion dome? It was not an everyday perfume. It was a precious luxury reserved for the most important occasions. Can you recall the heavy, powdery, intoxicating floral aroma of carnations, jasmine, and iris that would linger in the hallway long after your mother had left for a theater performance or a New Year's Eve party? When we were children, we would sneak into the bedroom just to carefully lift the red cap and inhale the magical scent of adulthood. It smelled of confidence, of rare celebrations, and of a deep, comforting femininity. Red Moscow was a scent that bound generations of women together. Even today, if you catch a faint whiff of that distinct powdery carnation, you are instantly transported back to a time when your mother was young, beautiful, and getting dressed up in her best wool dress. It was more than just a fragrance. It was the invisible, beautiful aura of our childhood homes, a scent that still brings a sudden emotional lump to our throats when we remember it. And now let us remember the heavy metallic beast of the kitchen, the cast iron manual meat grinder. Every family in 1960s Russia had one, and using it was a true test of physical endurance. Do you remember how we would firmly attach it to the edge of the kitchen table using that thick metal screw? We would always fold a small rag or a piece of thick newspaper underneath the clamp so it would not scratch the precious wooden table. Grinding meat was never a solitary task. It was a communal effort. Our mothers would feed the pieces of meat, onions, and soaked white bread into the top, while we, the children or the husbands, were tasked with turning the heavy wooden handle. Do you remember the squelching sound it made and the immense physical effort required when a tough piece of meat hit the internal blade? You had to put your entire body weight into turning that handle. And yet, this strenuous labor was the only way to make the delicious homemade kotlety, those juicy Russian meat patties that were the staple of every festive dinner. When the work was done, dismantling the heavy, greasy metal parts to wash them in hot, soapy water was a chore in itself. But the reward was the unparalleled smell of those kotletes sizzling in a hot cast iron frying pan. The manual meat grinder taught us that the most delicious things in life required hard work, patience, and the loving effort of the whole family. Let us turn the page back to the thick tier of desk calendar that hung on the wall or sat on the desk in almost every home. In 1960s Russia, this small block of paper was our daily window to the world. Do you remember the satisfying sound of tearing off yesterday's page every single morning? It was a ritual that officially began the day. But this calendar was so much more than just a way to track dates. Each thin, slightly rough page was a treasure trove of information. On the front, there was the date, the day of the week, and the time the sun would rise and set. But the real magic was always on the back. Do you remember turning the torn page over to read a piece of poetry, a clever recipe for a cabbage pie, a health tip, or a fascinating historical fact? Our grandmothers would carefully save the most interesting pages, tucking them into thick books or sewing boxes for future reference. Sometimes, a particularly good recipe would be pinned to the kitchen wall. The tear-off calendar gave a unique rhythm to our lives. As the year progressed, the thick block of paper grew thinner and thinner, a visual and tactile reminder of the passing of time. Tearing off that final page on the 31st of December was a moment of profound reflection and anticipation. It was a simple object, but it brought us daily wisdom, comfort, and a shared connection to the passing days of our youth. Let us close our eyes and tune into the warm, crackling sound of the massive wooden radiogram, perhaps a beautiful rigonda, occupying a place of honor in the living room. This piece of furniture was the absolute heart of home entertainment in 1960s Russia. Do you remember the polished wooden cabinet and the glowing green eye of the tuning dial that looked so mysterious in the dark? Operating it was a delicate art. You would lift the heavy wooden lid to reveal the turntable, carefully slip a black vinyl record from its paper sleeve, and gently lower the metal needle. The initial hiss and pop before the music started was a sound filled with pure magic and anticipation. We would sit on the rug for hours listening to our favorite singers or twisting the large knobs to catch a faint, static-filled radio broadcast from a faraway station. The smell of the warming vacuum tubes inside the wooden casing was unmistakable, a cozy scent of electricity and heated dust. Gathering around the radiogram was how we spent our evenings, singing along to familiar melodies or dancing closely during small house parties. It was not just a machine, it was our connection to music, to culture, and to each other. The deep, rich analog sound it produced has never been matched by modern digital devices. It was the soulful, musical heartbeat of our youthful, carefree days. And now let us remember the magical glass or metal siphon that brought the joy of sparkling water right into our kitchens. If you grew up in 1960s Russia, you will surely remember this heavy, elegant bottle wrapped in a protective metal mesh. We did not have endless shelves of bottled sodas at the grocery store, so we made our own fizzy magic at home. Do you remember the small, heavy silver gas cartridges that we had to buy in special boxes? The ritual of charging the siphon was incredibly exciting and perhaps a little bit scary. You would fill the heavy glass bottle with cold tap water, screw the top on tightly, insert the small metal cartridge into the holder, and twist it hard. Suddenly, you would hear that loud, aggressive hiss as the pressurized gas injected into the water, transforming it instantly into a bubbling delight. Oh, the joy of pressing the heavy metal lever and watching the aggressive stream of sparkling water shoot into a crystal glass. We would mix it with homemade fruit syrups, perhaps cherry or raspberry jam, creating the most incredible domestic lemonades. The siphon was the star of every birthday party and Sunday dinner. It felt like a small domestic miracle, turning ordinary tap water into a festive celebration. It was a symbol of our resourcefulness and our ability to find profound joy in the simplest, most everyday rituals. Let us project our memories onto the living room wall and record the absolute magic of the dia projector, the slide projector. Long before we had endless cartoons on demand, watching a film strip was a grand theatrical event in 1960s Russia. Do you remember how we would eagerly wait for the sun to set, turning the living room into a dark, cozy cinema? We would hang a crisp white bedsheet on the wall or use the back of a large door as our screen. The projector itself smelled strongly of heated metal and burning dust from the intense lamp inside. The ritual was so deliberate. You would carefully thread the delicate film strip into the slot, and someone, usually a parent or an older sibling, would read the captions aloud in the dark. We would lie on the carpet, mesmerized by the glowing still images of fairy tales, brave heroes, and magical forests. The defining sound of this memory is the loud, mechanical click of the projector as it advanced to the next frame. Sometimes, if the film was left in the light too long, it would start to bubble and melt, causing a moment of sudden panic. This was not solitary screen time. This was a shared, intimate family experience. The slide projector brought stories to life right in our homes, wrapping us in the warm, secure darkness of our childhood, surrounded by the voices of those who loved us most. Let us remember the grand, colorful centerpiece of almost every Soviet apartment, the thick, heavy wool carpet hanging proudly on the wall. To anyone outside of our culture, hanging a rug on the wall might seem strange. But if you lived in 1960s Russia, you know it was absolutely essential. Do you remember the unique, slightly dusty smell of the thick wool? Hanging that heavy carpet was a monumental task, requiring strong nails, precise measuring, and usually the help of a neighbor. We hung them not just for decoration, but for warmth, to insulate the thin concrete walls of our apartment buildings, and to muffle the sounds of our noisy neighbors. But for us children, the carpet on the wall was an entire universe of imagination. Do you remember lying in bed before falling asleep, staring at the complex geometric patterns, the deep reds, browns, and golds? We would trace the intricate paths with our eyes, finding hidden faces, strange animals, and secret maps within the woven design. It was our nightly meditation, a visual lullaby before sleep. Touching the rough, warm surface of the carpet gave us a profound sense of security and coziness. It was a symbol of prosperity and a deeply held tradition that made our small, cramped apartments feel like true, loving homes, shielding us from the cold winds of the long, harsh Russian winters. And now, let us recall a small, round object that held immense joy, the flat tin box of Montpensier lollipops. In 1960s Russia, these small, colorful fruit drops were a rare and highly coveted treat. Do you remember the struggle to pry open the tight metal lid of that round tin? Sometimes you had to use a coin or the edge of a spoon to pop it off. Once opened, you were greeted by a beautiful mosaic of tiny, brightly colored hard candies, heavily dusted with fine white sugar so they would not stick together. Can you still taste the intense, artificial but wonderful flavor of the lemon, raspberry, and pear drops? We would suck on them slowly, making them last as long as humanly possible, hiding the tin under our pillows so our siblings would not find them. But the life of the Montpensier tin did not end when the candy was gone. Oh no, that was only the beginning. That sturdy metal box instantly found a second life in our mother's sewing cabinets. Do you remember opening an old candy tin, expecting a sweet treat, only to find it filled with an assortment of loose buttons, safety pins, and tangled spools of thread? It became a tiny treasure chest of domestic repair. That sound of buttons rattling against the metal tin is a sound of pure nostalgia, a reminder of a time when nothing was ever thrown away and everything was repurposed with endless practicality. Let us turn the heavy metal wheel of memory and listen to the rapid, rhythmic clicking of the hand-cranked sewing machine, likely a heavy black Podolsk model. In 1960s Russia, this incredible machine was a vital lifeline for nearly every family. Store-bought clothes were often dull or impossible to find, so our mothers and grandmothers became master tailors out of pure necessity. Do you remember the immense weight of the machine in its wooden carrying case? It was decorated with beautiful, fading golden floral patterns along its black iron body. Operating it required immense coordination. One hand had to constantly turn the wooden handle on the right, while the left hand expertly guided the fabric under the rapidly moving needle. The smell of the fine machine oil used to lubricate the gears was always present in the air when clothes were being made or mended. We would sit for hours watching our mothers transform a simple, plain piece of fabric into a beautiful dress for a school dance, or magically patch up the knees of our worn-out trousers. The clicking sound of that sewing machine was the sound of a mother's profound love and fierce determination to provide for her family. It was a tool of immense creativity and survival, stitching our lives together one strong, careful thread at a time. Let us recall the elegant comfort of the metal tea glass holder, the podstakannik. While we mostly associate them with the gentle rocking of long-distance trains, many families in 1960s Russia proudly used them at home, especially our fathers and grandfathers. Do you remember the intricate stamped designs on the metal? Sometimes they featured space rockets, historical monuments, or rich, sprawling oak leaves. You would slip a simple faceted glass directly into the holder, allowing you to drink boiling hot black tea without burning your fingers. Can you hear the specific delicate clinking sound of the silver spoon striking the sides of the glass as you stirred your sugar? Drinking tea from a podstakannik elevated a simple evening drink into an event of serious reflection. Our grandfathers would sit at the kitchen table, the heavy metal holder grounding them as they read the evening newspaper or listened to the news on the radio. It made the tea taste somehow richer, deeper, and more important. The podstakannik is a symbol of Russian hospitality and unhurried conversation. It represents those long, dark winter evenings spent safe indoors, sharing stories and sipping strong, sweet tea, finding immense warmth and comfort in the heavy metallic grip of a beloved family heirloom. And now, let us remember the distinct, slightly damp smell of wet wool radiating from the cast iron heaters. Yes, we are talking about valenki, the traditional Russian felt boots that saved us from the bitter, unforgiving cold of the 1960s winters. Do you remember how stiff and clumsy they felt when you first put them on as a child? Walking in deep snow was a struggle, but your feet were always incredibly warm, encased in thick, pressed sheep's wool. After hours of building snow forts, sledding down steep icy hills, and rolling in the drifts until we were soaked to the bone, we would finally come back home, completely exhausted. The immediate ritual was always the same. We had to take off those snow-caked valenki and place them carefully on the hot, ribbed cast iron radiator to dry. Within minutes, the entire apartment would be filled with the heavy, earthy scent of warm, damp felt. It is a smell that is completely unique to a Russian winter childhood. By the next morning, the valenki would be completely dry, stiff and surprisingly hot on the inside, ready to brave the snow once again. They were not stylish and they were certainly not elegant, but they were a symbol of pure, unconditional protection. They allowed us to experience the wild, freezing joy of winter without fear. Let us close our eyes and hear the incredibly fast, rhythmic clacking of wooden beads sliding across metal wires. This is the unmistakable sound of the shoti, the traditional wooden abacus used in absolutely every grocery store, bakery and pharmacy in 1960s Russia. Long before the era of electronic calculators, The shoti was the ultimate tool of mathematics. Do you remember standing in line, watching the cashier's fingers fly across the wooden frame with absolutely blinding speed? The women who worked those cash registers were true virtuosos. They would slide the beads left and right, their hands moving so fast they were practically a blur, calculating immense sums of kopecks and rubles without a single mistake. The sharp clack of the dark and light wooden beads hitting against each other was the definitive soundtrack of commerce. Every household also had a smaller version of the shoti for balancing the family budget.
As children, we loved to play with them, treating them like a noisy, fascinating toy, trying in vain to mimic the effortless speed of the store clerks. The abacus was a marvel of manual computation, a reliable, battery-free instrument that required true skill. It reminds us of a time when the human mind, aided by a simple frame of wood and wire, was more than enough to keep the world turning. Let us dial back time and feel the heavy, solid plastic of the rotary telephone that sat on a small table in the hallway. In 1960s Russia, having a telephone at home was a massive privilege, and using it was an intentional, physical act. Do you remember the weight of the receiver against your ear? And most importantly, do you remember the tactile joy of dialing a number? You had to place your finger into the specific hole, pull the heavy plastic dial all the way clockwise to the metal stop, and then let it go. The dial would return to its starting position with a satisfying, whirring, clicking sound. You had to do this for every single digit. It took time, it took patience, and if you made a mistake on the very last number, you had to hang up and start the entire process all over again. The telephone was tethered to the wall by a thick, twisted fabric cord. We would stand in a hallway for hours, twisting that cord around our fingers as we gossiped with classmates or listened to the comforting voice of a distant relative. You could not walk around the house or take the phone outside. You had to be present, grounded in that exact spot, truly listening to the person on the other end. That heavy rotary phone taught us that true connection required patience, attention, and the willingness to just stand and listen. And now, let us remember the metallic, crunching sound of honesty and civic duty on public transport. Let us recall the composter, the mechanical ticket puncher mounted on the walls of buses and trams in 1960s Russia. Back then, there were no electronic turnstiles or digital passes. You would drop your small change into a transparent box, tear off a paper ticket from the roll yourself, and then you had to validate it. Do you remember walking down the shaky aisle of a moving bus to reach the small metal device bolted to the window frame? You would slide your thin paper ticket into the slot and push the metal handle down with a sharp, forceful click. The machine would punch a specific, unique pattern of tiny holes into your ticket. It was entirely based on an honor system. We were trusted to buy our tickets and punch them ourselves. During rush hour, when the bus was packed incredibly tight, people would pass their money and tickets forward over the heads of strangers, relying on the collective honesty of the crowd to get their punched ticket returned to them. The composter was a symbol of a society built on mutual trust. That small paper ticket, filled with tiny precise holes, was proof that you belonged to a community that respected the rules and trusted one another implicitly. Finally, my dear friends, let us remember a ritual that united entire schools and neighborhoods in a quest for knowledge and literature. The massive collection of makulatura, or scrap paper. In 1960s and 70s Russia, books were incredibly precious. If you wanted to get your hands on a rare adventure novel by Alexandre Dumas, or a thrilling detective story, you could not simply buy it. You had to earn it by collecting and trading in 20 kilograms of scrap paper. Do you remember scouring the apartment for old newspapers, magazines, and torn cardboard boxes? We would tie massive stacks of paper together with rough twine, the heavy bundles biting into our small fingers as we dragged them to the collection center. The smell of old, dusty newspaper ink was everywhere. The entire school would compete to see which class could collect the most makulatura, turning the streets into bustling anthills of children dragging sleds and wagons full of paper. But the greatest reward was walking out of that collection center holding the small, coveted coupon that allows you to purchase a brand new, beautifully bound book. We read those books until the pages fell out,
because we had literally traded our sweat and effort for them. This ritual taught us the profound value of literature and the incredible power of collective effort. It was a time when a simple stack of old newspapers could magically transform into an unforgettable adventure.
As we look back at these 30 fragments of our past, we realize something incredibly profound. We do not just miss the cast-iron waffle makers, the heavy rotary telephones, or the woven string bags. What we truly miss is the way time felt when we used them. We miss the slow, deliberate pace of our youth. We miss the feeling of sitting in a cramped, warm kitchen, drinking tea from a metal glass holder, and looking deeply into the eyes of the people we loved. These objects were not just things, they were the physical anchors of our youth, holding the echoes of our parents' voices and the innocent, bell-like laughter of our childhood. The world has changed so incredibly fast, but the memories we share remain untouched, safely guarded in our hearts forever. If this journey back to 1960s Russia brought a tear to your eye and warmed your soul, please subscribe to our channel and like this video so we can continue to preserve these precious memories together. Now, my dear friend, I have a question for you. Which of these beautiful objects do you miss the absolute most? Or perhaps you still have one hidden in a dusty cabinet? Please, share your most beautiful memory in the comments below. We read every single one, because your history is our history. Thank you for remembering with us today.